My guest today is Kristy Mia. She's a passionate advocate for women's empowerment, drawing from her own experiences as a mother of 3 boys. She has over 2 decades of experience as a doula, childbirth educator, and nutritionist. Kristy offers mentorship and coaching enriched by her love for exploration and nature, and she guides mothers towards prioritizing self-care, establishing balance, encouraging them to embrace their potential and find joy amidst life's challenges. Kristy, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm happy to be here.
Even though I hear that you are post-call from a long birth?
Yes, a beautiful, very empowering, inspirational birth, but it takes me days to recover afterward. It's a lot to put in, and I'm not even the mom doing it, so...
Oh, you're preaching to the choir, because this is why I don't work full time as a midwife anymore, because I value, and not just value, I desperately need my sleep more than I used to. And like each year of my career, it just got harder and harder and harder to bounce back from a night of call.
Yeah, it's true. And I feel that it's hard enough to be on call. That's probably one of the hardest things, for me, still having children that I run around for all the time. So yeah, the two together makes it a little tiring for sure.
Totally. I remember back in the day, like trying to do grocery shopping and knowing that like you might abandon your cart and that it's super not cool, but you just like have to do it. And I do believe I only abandoned a cart once. But those thoughts get in your mind because you're like, I really need to go grocery shopping. Should I take the risk, right? Like that's stressful having to think those thoughts.
Yeah, no, there's millions of those thoughts that I go through in the 2 weeks prior to due date. Not being able to go anywhere, thinking every moment, who's going to cover all the things that I do? How do I get this child from here and this child from there if it happens? Yeah, there's a lot to cover.
Oh gosh, you're bringing back memories, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful that I have a grown child, and I'm grateful that I am not on call 24/7 anymore. You're making me feel so grateful.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we digress right out of the gate. I would love it if you would introduce yourself and just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, your personal life, whatever you're willing to share, and kind of how you got on this path.
Yeah, well, it's a long road that got me to where I'm at, and I'm very grateful for every part of it, even the challenges. But I'm Kristy Mia, and I live in the San Francisco East Bay area with my 3 boys who are 19, 15, and 12, and my chocolate lab and 2 kitties. And I started this probably 22 years ago, being on the path that I'm on now, but I didn't really know that I would be doing it the way that I'm doing it. It started originally with going back to school to become a nutritionist, and was based in holistic nutrition with Ayurveda thrown in there, and holistic, just a lot of different things thrown together that really helped be well-rounded, much like functional medicine. And it was beautiful. And in the process of that, I was taking yoga certifications. And one of my yoga, which I became obsessed with, and I started taking more and more and more. And one of them actually was with Judith Lassiter, and it was for pre and postnatal yoga. And she had brought in a doula to help us understand what mothers were going through, so that when we teach, we just could understand the process a little bit more. And I was young at the time, I hadn't had children. And I just remember going home completely obsessed with wanting to be a doula. Like that was it, that's what I wanted to do. So I started taking trainings to become a doula, and by the time I was ready to have children, in, thinking about it, I started becoming a doula for free for people that couldn't afford doulas, and started giving it as seva and just my service out there. And I just fell in love with it so much. And it was really wonderful because my nutrition degree really added a lot of well-rounded strength to that, to be able to help mothers through preparing all the way through their pregnancy into motherhood, with nutrition and herbal care and supplementation and such. And then throw in my yoga trainings, meditation, breath work, all of that. It just really became a very well rounded, offering that I was able to have. And over the years, when I had my 3 children of my own, I started to realize that there was, so many women out there that really needed support. And by the time I had my 3rd child, I was in a place of complete overwhelm because I was really left alone to parent on my own. And my husband at the time was working a lot. And I was in a space where my family was on the East Coast, I was on the West Coast. I didn't have a lot of support, even though I have a lot of friends. I didn't have anything daily to help me through the process. Mm-hmm. And so as I went through those challenges, it really, I really had to draw upon my own skill set, my own trainings to help me through the process, and realize that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to support mothers who were in overwhelm. I wanted to get them before they were in that space of overwhelm, because it tends to be, that we always wait until people are drowning to help them, or to have an intervention of some sort that is actually helping them to thrive. So it then became my mission to really help women through the process of their pregnancy, as well as their labor and delivery, and then into motherhood and through motherhood. And that also came out because the majority of my doula clients who I helped with their delivery, they would stay with me for the first year of their child's life. So I was always helping them with what to do if the child was sick, and this stage of what was happening with the baby, or with nutrition, or with supplements, or how they were feeling, or breastfeeding. There was just a huge gamut of ways to support them, and I was doing it all for free. It just was something that I was so passionate about. I didn't even think twice about it, but it got to a point where I was really starting to deplete myself in the process of doing so much for everyone, and realized, well, I need to bring that into my business as part of my actual business, instead of just out of service, which is a beautiful thing. But when you have 3 children that you have to take care of yourself, and it becomes something that you really need to adjust. So it's been a really rewarding journey. It's every time I am at a birth, every time I'm doing a childbirth education class, I just feel like this was what I was meant to do. I know that I'm good at it, which is a beautiful feeling when you know that you have a gift that you're actually good at, and you can help people with in a really, sustainable way. Mm-hmm. That feels really good. So I really enjoy all of it. And now, I've come to bring things online. So I have some online courses that help with coaching mothers, as well as the childbirth education prep series, and some other fun things that we have on there that we offer on KristyMia.com. So it's all beautiful. I feel very blessed to be in it and to be able to offer what I have.
Yeah, I mean, you have a lot going on. I mean,
yeah,
it's hard to do the different types of doula services, let alone, I don't even have an understanding of how you work in routine visits, such as a nutritionist, kind of like all of that happening in there. Or are your clients kind of signing on for the whole thing so that it smooths it out a little bit? Or do you have clients who utilize you in one way but not the others?
The majority of my offering as a doula, I package it all together.
I see.
And it's a very generous packaging of everything that I offer, including a postpartum visit that I give them a full treatment where we do dry brushing, oiling, gua sha, massage, moxibustion, and then a full assessment for mom and baby, and then breastfeeding support. So that's just all. I love to do it all, so I just include it all in my package. But then there are people that come to me just for the childbirth prep, and then people who follow up for nutrition. A lot of people, have the nutrition part separately in general, but and the mother's coaching, that happens more organically. People coming, realizing like they feel like they're in over their head, or they're just living a life that feels really unfulfilling or overwhelming, and they just find me. And when I do coaching, same thing, it kind of just includes all of it, because we're working individually with what each person needs. So
yeah, I get that. I also find that I throw in all the things because I can't personally put the blinders on when I see that other thing going on, right? So, I think you probably know this. I do like pregnancy and postpartum athleticism work. I'm not a yoga teacher. It's totally different. It's definitely more in like the strength training and CrossFit kind of realm. But nonetheless, like I've got all these people who have questions about movement during pregnancy, even if they don't do the thing that I am most passionate about. And I can't just like ignore that and be like, I'm not including that in this service.
Well,
so
for
everybody
sure.
just kind of gets all the little extras. And then of course I see people who come to me just for that piece or whatever. So I get it. It just kind of works itself out. Over time, it just works itself out. You used two words that I don't think all of our listeners will know. I only know one of them myself, so I would like to know what the other one is. So you said gua sha, and I don't know that one. And of course I know what moxibustion is because I'm a midwife, but I suspect many of our listeners don't. So please enlighten us.
Sure. So gua sha is a stone that you use. It's traditionally in Asian cultures where you use to define your face or to drain your lymph nodes. So there's all different types of them. We have them now in jade and rose quartz. I have one in rose quartz. I have one that's in like a lava stone. And you're using it to kind of move along like how you would with your knuckles and drain down the sides of your lymph nodes, right? Mm-hmm. But also you can define the features of your face. And so when I use it for postpartum, I'm doing it along the lines of the breast ducts. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to open up their lymph nodes around the upper chest and nodes that come down the neck, and then down towards where, all the milk is coming in. So we're wanting to really stimulate that part. And then also you can do that along the lines of where they're the most sore to help break up any energy that's stuck, any muscles that are like really tender or knotted. You're just very smoothly moving the gua sha stone along. It helps to break up cellulite. I mean, there's a lot of beautiful ways that you can use it, but it's really helpful postpartum because it helps to really balance things out, move energy where you want to move it, open up the milk ducts.
Got it.
It's
so
good stuff, yeah.
In that more like medical / PT world, we would think of it as lymphatic drainage, as a tool towards lymphatic drainage, and then it seems to have all these other potential properties.
And the moxibustion is done, so in a lot of cultures, hundreds of years ago, when a mother would give birth, she would be, over a heated bed, or she would be next to a fire for the first 40 days after birth. And that helped to, reduce her, shrink her uterus back into place, help with the recovery phase, and help with the kidney functioning, right? And so moxibustion after birth is used much in that way, where we're taking moxibustion, which is an herb. It kind of looks like a cigar. You can get it in different forms, but that's traditionally how you'll see it. And you burn it. It smells a little sagey in the way that it fills the room. And you're burning it just above the kidney space on their back, and then above and around the uterus. And so you're warming that area and allowing the herb to penetrate into those areas so that it helps heal and helps to reduce the amount of recovery time that you have. It's really powerful. I love doing it for people. Not everybody chooses to do it because it does bring a lot of scent into the home. There's, it's smoky.
Yeah.
But it is a really great tool for recovery.
Yeah, I have never used moxibustion in these ways. The way I am familiar with moxibustion is when you're trying to turn a breech baby.
Yeah, or for acupuncture, right? They use it a lot in that.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually think it smells a bit like marijuana. And
yes.
It does smoke up the room a little too much is my only real downside from that. Otherwise, I'm like, of all the things we can try, like I'm very attached to evidence and hard science, and so sometimes some of the practices out there can be hard for me to accept. I'm open to all of them, and what I remind people is that these things are very safe. The worst that can happen is it doesn't make it better, but it's not going to make it worse. Like, that's kind of my stance on it. But I don't work. This is not my world. This is your world.
Yeah, there's no side effects that you would have. There's no negative side effects. You're right, and the worst that could happen is that you don't feel a positive effect from it. But
exactly.
They're all very safe, and I've been using them for 20 years. I've taken so many courses that I kind of pick and choose the things that I've seen to work every time.
Yeah.
And I was just saying to a potential client the other day on a discovery call that I used to come in the beginning of my doula practice where I would have like a suitcase. You'd go to the hospital, you'd have like this huge bag of tricks, so many things in it. And then I learned over the years to really cut down. Now I just have this tiny backpack.
Yep.
Because you're really just using what works every single time.
Yep.
Right? Yeah.
I like that. That is very true. Because I remember talking to people over the years, and I probably even say this now because I am talking about doulas in general when I say this. And of course, many doulas are still carrying a suitcase, right? Mm-hmm. So I always tell people that the doula is like the last thing that comes out of Mary Poppins' bag. Like, the patient needs the suitcase, not you. The patient, the person birthing that baby, is the one who needs to find all the tools that their partner or whoever else is with them can do. You call the doula later than you think because that's a human that's going to burn out, right? Like, yeah. I actually try to like get ahead of this for the doulas so that you don't.
It's very
end up
true, and it's interesting
early.
to hear you say that because it's a really great reminder. Actually, I have a lot of friends that are doulas that always have backup. I have only once in 20 years used a backup, and it's part of it has been to my detriment because on the really long births, there's no break.
Yeah.
And, there's moments where you really are feeling like you're hitting a wall and you can barely keep yourself awake when you're with somebody for that amount of time because you're on the entire time. Mentally, physically, emotionally, it's all there. So, yeah, you do usually...
I think also, and I realize this isn't going to work every time, and every couple is going to be different. Every birth you attend is going to be different. But it's like there's a way in which you try to get the other loved ones involved in such a way that you can step away. So, I often feel like that's the hard work of the doula is to gauge, like, how much can they handle and how much do they want it to be this way versus how much do I really have to do this in order for it to be effective? Because I do think part of our job is to help keep that couple together. And
for sure. That's a huge part of it.
And if we do that really well, sometimes we can step away a little bit more. But I get that in the big picture is you're still never off because you're always watching, always paying attention and seeing where you have to come back into the fold, even if you've delegated well.
Yeah, even if you've delegated well. And it is really important to actually step away to have a break for yourself, but also to allow the couple to experience something together.
Yeah. And
to see, how they can actually connect in that space together.
Yeah.
And this last birth that I just attended, it was so amazingly powerful. And this dad partner, he was just absolutely incredible. The caretaking that he did, he moaned with her, he breathed with her, he cared for her in such a tender, loving, dedicated way. It was really incredible.
And I think they need that because we have to pull strength from something when times get tough postpartum. When the excitement, that mountaintop moment fades, because it does, right? Mm-hmm. Like the reason I'm a midwife is 110% because of my birth experience. Mm. And when the hormones went away, I had to sustain myself on other things. And that connection that's made between the couple, I think, can go a long, long way in the postpartum period, because there's so many ups and downs, which I know we'll touch on. Are you pregnant or a new parent looking to ensure a better postpartum experience? Or are you a birth worker looking to improve your postpartum care skills? Check out Thriving After Birth, an online self-paced course by me, midwife and educator Tanya Tringali. It's 10.5 hours of video content featuring experts in lactation, mental health, pelvic floor health, pediatric sleep issues. You also get worksheets and a workbook, as well as options to have a one-on-one session with me. Sign up at motherwitmaternity.com/thriving, and let's improve postpartum care together. I have one question, because I don't know that I've ever had the opportunity to ask somebody this question. So I do have this like weird mishmash of like Q&A for you, because I found all these loose ends. I'm like, ooh, I can ask her that. Okay, so it's a yoga question. I need someone like you to tell my listeners and my people who come to me, especially with that fitness piece, because yoga is often not their thing, and they're very clear that yoga is not their thing. But I'm like, no, hear me out. Prenatal yoga is different. Everyone should go to prenatal yoga. I have this idea, and it's based on my own experience for sure, and that is that when my body, as I got more pregnant, when my body started to be achy in the various ways that are super common in pregnancy, prenatal yoga made it better every single time, and that feeling would last for like 2 or 3 days, and then thank God class would come around again, and I could go again, and I could get that next hit of feeling really good in my body. And that's what I want people to understand. Like, if you could pitch prenatal yoga to someone who thinks yoga's not for them, what would you tell them? And how do you get this message across? Because I rarely get somebody to do it, even though I'm telling them my story and saying it in this way. So I am looking for new tools from you.
First of all, it's for everybody, right?
Agreed.
So, and prenatal yoga is much, it's kind of more like a restorative yoga on a lot of levels. Even though you can do a very powerful practice, you're coming into it knowing that you are taking care of the things that need attention, right? So we're not there to impress anybody on the mat. We're not trying to do any handstands or, we are there purely to feel better. And so when you come into class and you hit the mat, it is purely for you and whatever is ailing you, whatever is concerning you, whatever is presenting in your body, your mind, your spirit, all of it together. And there on the mat, it is dedicated to helping you feel better. So when I teach a prenatal class, it is purely about, let's get you to a place that when you leave this class, you are feeling so blissful, right? And you're just feeling like, oh, I can do 10 minutes of this a day and feel so much better in my body, mind, and spirit. And it's really not as hard as I thought it was, right? And so I think it's really important to understand that prenatal yoga, if you have a good teacher, and it's you want to connect with your teacher in general in any yoga practice, it makes all the difference in the world in the way that you practice. But it is made to help you also not just feel better in that moment, but be able to prepare for labor. So we're doing the work of opening the hips. We're doing the work of, supporting the pelvic girdle and the whole pelvic zone, like all of it together. We're doing the work of supporting your back because there's a lot of achy back syndrome that happens. You could have back labor down the line, and afterwards your back tends to be sore as well. So it's preparatory work all the way through. So if you do prenatal yoga, it will help you through your labor and then into postpartum. So for me, it's like you're winning no matter what you do when you come to the mat. There's no way that you're going to leave feeling like, oh, I wish I didn't do that.
Yeah.
You're going to feel like, oh, that was very different than I thought it was going to be, and I love it.
Yeah, I would argue also that it is an opportunity to optimize fetal positioning, because you do spend so much time in deep squats and forward leaning positions. So without even like thinking, now's my time to do my quote unquote exercises to get my baby into the right position, which you see everywhere these days, it's a natural part of the class. And then the other piece that I find is that what happens in that hour and a half, you find 2 or 3 exercises that are like the things you wish you could do all day, every day to feel good, and they're different for everyone. But then you take those few things home, and those are the things that you do every day, or you tell your partner, can you press down on my tushy just in this way, right? Like, yes, just like that. Like, that's the kind of thing that you take out of that. And I just wish more people who don't think of themselves as people who do yoga, I want them to be more open to prenatal yoga.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, from that, you can definitely create, this is what I do with a lot of my clients, is you can take 4 moves, let's say, and create your own sequence that you do to feel better, have better positioning for your baby, and, have a body that's really feeling sustainable throughout the pregnancy, because there's so much that comes at you. It's a really wonderful thing. I highly recommend it.
I can tell you do. Cool. Well, I will make people listen to this instead of listening to me ramble on and try to convince them based on my own experience. And, but, by the way, I love yoga, and I wish I did more of it, but I have all these other interests that take up my time, and it gets hard, and I kind of go in and out of it. Like, I go through phases of doing a little more yoga and then just kind of like not getting back to it because of all the other things.
Well, the most important part of yoga, for me anyway, that I see as a benefit for people is really learning how to do the breath work. Mm-hmm. So even if we're not talking about posture work, the benefit you get from learning how to have encouragement over your breath, I would say control, but we're never fully in control, but having that encouragement to be able to remind yourself how to breathe. Because when you practice your breath work, when your pranayama becomes a regular practice, even if you're just doing 3 minutes a day, then your body can uptake it when it needs it automatically, and it just kicks it on, right? So when you're in a panic state or something comes at you that you're not able to handle well emotionally, that breath is the tool that you have to be able to self-regulate and be able to get yourself to a place where you can handle it. So if anything, come for the breath work, because that's going to help you in every area of life, not just in your birthing process.
Totally. 100%. Couldn't agree more. All right, I'm going to change gears here. I would also love it. Here's another question that I wouldn't say tired of answering. I'm never tired of answering these questions, but where I love to hear a fresh take, and when I get the opportunity, I'm happy to have somebody tackle this on my behalf. I also struggle sometimes to get people to choose a postpartum doula over a baby nurse. Not always. Some people are willing to go that route. I'm always very clear that I have a bias, and I would rather people have a postpartum doula than a baby nurse. And I get that the needs of some people are such that a baby nurse is absolutely what they need, and that's what they want, and that end of story, done. But I don't know if people really deeply appreciate the difference between postpartum doulas and baby nurses. And I was a postpartum doula myself when I was a young mother and I was putting myself through nursing school. I was never a baby nurse. From your perspective and from what you've seen, your experience and your exposure, what do you think are the big takeaways that people need to know so that they can make a truly informed decision about choosing a postpartum doula versus a baby nurse?
In my opinion, I think the big difference is you're getting holistic care. So I think baby nurses are fabulous at what they do. I think it's the difference between getting a dietitian from a hospital and a nutritionist who's trained in a well-rounded, functional way. That's kind of how I liken it to. So with a postpartum doula, you are getting a person that's not just supporting you in the needs that you have as a mother and helping you out with baby. You're also getting belly binding. You're getting somebody who knows how to support your body in a way that is going to help your recovery be a little bit more manageable and maybe even faster recovery. Less pain. So a lot of the things that I did as a postpartum doula, the belly binding, the way that I cooked for people, because there are specific foods that you want to be eating postpartum that will help you in the recovery, and also just with the lack of sleep, the nutrients that you need are very different. So you are getting, pieces that you wouldn't be getting from a nurse because the training is very different. You would be getting, different experience on how to do maybe more outside of the box things with breastfeeding, taking care of baby bonding, the partner's way of connecting with baby, helping you through the process of maybe how to adjust your sleep schedule and the feeding schedule. For me, it would be a no-brainer choice, because it's like you're getting 20 things as opposed to 5 things, right? So I would want somebody who's going to take care of a larger gamut of things and also come in a way where it's not so business, it's not such a business model. And I may be wrong. There may be nurses out there that maybe are don't treat it that way, but it seems more like a business to me, where doula work is so much more intimate.
Yeah. Well, and my bias, and I am, by the way, totally open if there's a baby nurse listening to this, or somebody who had a baby nurse and is like, you have it all wrong, Tanya. Just tell me, it's all good. I'll share that information, or I'll bring you on to explain it yourself. My understanding and experience basically is that people hire a baby nurse to take their baby and take care of it at night so that they can sleep.
Yeah.
Whereas postpartum doula work is something where you kind of want the doula around during the day, and doesn't mean doulas can't do night work, but I see less of it, because if we've got them set up for success, they're kind of together and in tune with each other, and we're not just like sweeping the baby away. So like when I was a doula, and again, very long time ago, and I remember also that I worked in I want to say it was like 3 or 4 hour shifts. I worked for a company who hired the doula. So it wasn't like my own setup, and I was young and I was in school and it worked for me. So I don't know how people set this up for themselves, and you can elaborate on this, but I would go and be there for like 3 or 4 hours, and I would like strap the baby to my chest and go to the grocery store while I put the mom to bed for a nap, right? And with the baby on my chest, I would cook the meal, and when the baby needed to nurse, then I would wake mom up and give the baby back, and we would work on breastfeeding and all the things, and then I would do some more cleaning up and finish prepping the meal and sit her down with the meal and get the baby back to sleep with her, and then maybe that day was over, and another day would look really different. Does that sound like what you do, in the ballpark of what you do, as opposed to the fact that I don't believe would ever hear a story like that from a baby nurse?
Yeah, no, I do think that most baby nurses are there to take over what's happening in the nighttime schedule. Mm-hmm. So it is whisking baby away so that mom and dad or partner can sleep. Where postpartum doula, you are attending to the mother's needs as well as the baby's needs. So in general, that's what a doula is, right? You're an attendant to the needs of what they are needing in more ways than one. So when I very much like you, I'd be cooking, I'd be cleaning out the bottles if they were using bottles, I would be sterilizing everything, I'd be making sure that we go over their scheduling, see if we can shift things, if their breastfeeding schedule wasn't working with pumping, we would be going over all the pumping things, we'd be talking to the partner about what their needs were and how they could fit into it, and since the mom was the one breastfeeding, what could they do to take over in other ways so that mom could get the rest? Learning ways for recovery, bringing breath work into it, calm baby breathing. I mean, there's such a long list of things that you go through when you're doing postpartum work. And I mean, just for the cooking alone, I think it's totally worth it.
Right.
So, I mean,
because one of the most upsetting things to me is how much takeout people eat the first few weeks after birth.
Especially in America, because we are not surrounded by our families.
Right. And the fact that like we give literally as gifts, gift cards to like Uber Eats and stuff, because we know that that's what people need. But like, I'm just not sure how I feel about the like not having great access to home cooked meals or some like food prep brought over or whatever the case may be. And that's tough. And I get that it's like such a different situation for everyone. And sometimes we just need to eat. Totally get it. But I just want to see a little more shifting. And just if you're going to pay someone to come into your house, you're going to get some home cooked meals from a doula. You just are.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway. And it's going to be something that actually contributes to your health.
Absolutely.
I mean, nutrition in general is missed so much in the medical field.
Yep.
So that's a whole nother conversation. But, and I know your background with that too is like, when you get into the nutrition piece of things, you realize like, why are we not seeing that as the first line of preventative care? So yeah, if you think about it in the way that we're trying to prevent anything further from going awry in the postpartum recovery, right, you definitely want to include that in the mix.
Absolutely. I mean, outside of the sheer specifics of being pregnant, having a baby, and postpartum, I wish that I could just focus on body movement and nutrition, because we can do so much with that, but it is incredibly time intensive, and it is incredibly, it's emotionally wrought for most people to sort themselves out in these ways. And it takes us time as hand holders, so to speak, to figure out how best to support someone on that journey. But that investment is priceless.
Well, it really is. Yeah. And you have to think about it that way, that it is an investment, because really when it comes down to it, you are investing in your health, the health of your family, the health of your baby, in all of these ways, whether you're talking about a birth doula, postpartum doula, a midwife, you know, all of it is an investment in your health, in the outcome of your birth. And it's so worth doing. And it's not just for privileged people. Like when I first started out, I was doing it for free. There are doulas. It's usually not the most experienced doulas, but still, you know, cases show that if you have a woman in the room, you're 85%, you know, less likely to have an intervention. So it's worth looking into. And postpartumly, you're thinking about how you're going to function, you know, months down the line with how you do in the first 6 weeks. So it's so worth it.
Hey everyone, it's me, Tanya, your host here at the Mother Wit Podcast. You know I sometimes invite my clients on the show to talk about their birth stories and postpartum experiences, but I want to tell you a little bit more about what those clients and I actually do together. I started Mother Wit to help people in the perinatal period achieve their health and wellness goals. That means whether you're hoping to conceive and struggling with high blood pressure or high blood sugar, or you're having trouble managing anxiety or depression in the postpartum period, or maybe you just need support and advocacy between prenatal or postpartum visits, I can help. Get a discount on your first consultation with me at motherwitmaternity.com using the code FIRSTCONSULT 10% off. That's 10% symbol, all one word. I'm looking forward to working with you and maybe having you on the show too.
We hope you're enjoying the Mother Wit podcast. If you are, please rate us and leave a review in iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to your podcast. Thanks so much. Now, back to the show.
Yeah, and I'm a big believer in the model of care in terms of the doula world, where the first X number of births we do should be done for free. The next X number of births should be at extremely low cost. And then we slowly move ourselves up, because if we're always bringing more people into the profession, there's always going to be people to replace, and we're always going to have someone for everyone. And even when I'm dealing with clients who can afford something, you know, I have a way of talking people through, look, you're going to prioritize this from a financial perspective the way you prioritize it, and I'm not going to impact that, and I'm not going to try. But what I want you to know is that people who come into this, me having been one of them, we're good right out of the gate, because we're on a mission. It's like so passion driven, and we're on a mission. And all it really takes to be good at this is a desire to help another person, and your hands and your body find the way. And yeah, do you get better over time? Of course we do. But like the leap from having no one to having a new-ish doula is ginormous. And then the steps start to get a little smaller from levels of experience and so forth. So I kind of give people that speech so that they kind of can figure out what it is that they need for themselves. And then I remind them that if they have a midwife, that midwife will teach that young doula how to do things.
Yeah,
but if you have a physician, it ain't happening. Sorry, physicians. But like, that's kind of the way it is, you know, like that really is just the way it is. Anyway, soapbox moment.
I agree with that though. And I do think that the importance of understanding the advocacy, you know, that can be supported, that you can be supported with a doula is a really, really important piece of it. Every time I am out of birth, I experience moments where there is fear mongering by hospital staff. And while I love so much of the hospital staff, there are definitely people that are bringing so much fear-based, you know, really assertive way of speaking that is just uncalled for. And for me, when you have a doula there who is experienced and has the knowledge and has the education, and you have done your education as well to get ready for your birth, you are in such better place. I mean, the birth story that you would have that way, as opposed to just going in blind by yourself, is extremely different. You can get lucky, you know, but the majority of the time you're going to have a lot of pushiness, and it gets really scary sometimes, because when you don't know, you don't know. Right. And so it can take you down a route that you just are not ready to go down, and you have no idea how to make those choices or decisions, what's right and what's right for you and your family, what's good for the baby.
And it's a balancing act, in my opinion, I think you'll agree, with where is the line of how much someone needs to invest in learning before we cross over into, now we're creating fear just by exploring too deep of certain ideas. And so where do you kind of pass the buck as the person who's going to have this baby to, I'm just going to have this other trusted person here to look out for me in these ways so that I don't have to dig too deep and plan to take care of myself on that level, because you can't keep your brain in this intellectual place paying attention to all this stuff and go deep inside to have your baby. You can't do it. So you kind of have to figure out, like, how much is the right amount of education, and then when do I pass it off to my doula and my healthcare team?
Yeah, and that's what the prep work is about, right? That's the prep work is, and I say this to every couple that I'm with, is early on in the stages of pregnancy, we want to start together so that we can all get on the same page. We learn the information we need to know. Everyone knows their part. I'm going to know a little bit more about this. You guys know these parts. This is the partner's role. So that when labor comes on, the only job that mom has is to be internally present with her body and the baby. That's it. And if you're going to the hospital, if that's your plan, that when you're in triage, you don't have to do anything except for be with your body and your baby and your breath. And the partner answers all the questions, and then the doula is there for the support and moving you through with ease.
Yeah. That's kind of like perfect world scenario stuff. And of course, we don't live in a perfect world. So, my last question for you before we move towards wrapping up, I think, and we've kind of worked our way there pretty organically, is I'd like to talk a little bit about how you work with people, particularly postpartum, but certainly with maybe a next pregnancy as well, where somebody maybe calls on a doula who didn't call on a doula the first time, or they did have a doula, but the birth didn't go according to plan, or whatever it is. How do you feel your work differs when you're working with somebody who's kind of green, unexposed, this is their first experience, we're trying to protect them and bring them in a good, positive way, versus somebody who has either experienced overt birth trauma or, again, just simply didn't have the birth that they planned for. They had a C-section, they're still in pain for some reason or another, breastfeeding difficulties, mood disorders. I mean, the gamut. I don't mean to say we need to touch on each of those things individually, because I think they all play out similarly in that we're now talking about somebody with a higher level of need. And so how does that change for you when you're working with that heavier stuff versus when things are still just like hunky-dory and we're trying to like lighten it up and cheerlead people on down the path that we know that they want to go down?
Well, both you may still be working through trauma, right? And there's an unlearning process in general. So whenever you're with somebody, whether they've had a traumatic experience with a prior birth or in life, almost always they're hearing negative stories, myths around birth. So there's an unlearning in general that needs to happen, where we unlearn. If you're surrounded by people who all the stories that they have about birth are negative, and what their beliefs in birth are so beyond natural birth being an okay thing, there's an unlearning that needs to happen there to begin with. But then you bring into the mix somebody who had a very negative experience with, whether it was a doula, a midwife, a doctor, or their own body, and not trusting their body to do something, and taking it on themselves as a shameful thing. Whatever the trauma is, the work that then needs to be done there obviously is very different, but it is something that takes priority, because when you are in labor, anything can come up. It's stored in our muscles, our tissues, our cells. So whether you had a car accident or a traumatic birth, whether you had, something that happened to you traumatically, it doesn't matter what it is, it can come up for you during birth. So the process is kind of similarly worked on, except for we have to get a little bit more real with the person that has experienced birth trauma, because there's an untrusting of their body, there's an untrusting of the people surrounding them that are helping them through the labor and delivery. And so it takes a lot of work in letting them know that they can trust me, that I have their best interest at heart, that I'm going to work with the people that they trust, usually their partner or their mother or both, to come to a place where they feel safe to birth the way that they need to, and that we're flexible around what they're going to need for birth. That it's not a one size fits all, and we're all trying, to do natural birthing or medicate. It's really tailored to, let's really figure out what's going to work for this person. And I usually want to take, the least long-term side effect solution first. So, if this is a person who has done the work to get over their trauma, like I have worked with a lot of people who have had sexual abuse, so that's something that comes up a lot. We've done a lot of journaling, they've done therapy, we've worked through what that may feel like in their body, how it may come up emotionally for them, and then how they can be supported by their partner and whoever is in our team. And then we're wanting to work through the process of what that may mean if they can't get past the block when they are in labor. And so we're taking the least, the path that's going to have the least negative impact upon them with medications, or even any type of thing that will help them relax. So I know it's controversial to talk about having a glass of wine during labor or having marijuana during labor, but everybody has different ways of doing things. And, you have to really make sure that you're working through things with people in a way that is going to help them get past their blocks and get them to a space that really helps them do what they need to do. And I'll say this, that when they're able to work with you in that way and trust you, the empowerment that comes for that mother is like no other. And then it's just something that's so beautiful, where they can then look at themselves after and really feel like they can do anything, because they were able to get past this and they were able to move through it. And there's no perfect way. There's no perfect way for any of it. There's just the way that works really well for you. And so, but there is work. I mean, it is definitely things that you're needing to move through. There's also work that needs to be done a lot of times in people's relationships and marriages, too, that will hold them back in labor. And I've had that happen quite a few times too. So knowing to work on those things ahead of time, it's so super important, because it will also follow you into parenthood. Those things don't go away, right? They're definitely going to revisit in some fashion when you are trying to parent children together. So, yeah. And I happen to enjoy doing that type of work, because I love seeing women being able to not only heal, but step into their power and really feel it within themselves.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, I think I see in myself and almost every woman I work with, their power comes out after, but not just after you've had a kind of a downturn, a dark place, hard period. Often it's hard in the relationship, and it's how you come out of that your power really comes out, because it is all the stuff that you didn't work on, not because you were necessarily being avoidant, although sometimes that's the case, just sometimes you didn't know any better or whatever it was, but all that stuff creeps up. And I'm always a little surprised, and I shouldn't be at this point, how at some point in the postpartum period I have to put on like my couples therapist hat. It happens almost every time. And it's in direct opposition to when I do my intake with my clients. I ask everyone how prepared they feel to become a parent, how confident they feel in their relationship, and how confident they feel about co-parenting. And it's like a Likert scale, 1 to 10 kind of scoring. And of course, during pregnancy, almost everyone, ranks those numbers pretty high for the partnership piece. Like, they'll rank themselves low. They'll like really diss themselves, but then like rank the partnership high. And then I watch almost all these couples go through a pretty hard time while we're still working together, which means it's at least in the first 12 weeks. And of course, sometimes I work with people longer, but it's happening early on. Like the first couple weeks are blissful. We're in this together. And then very often partners go back to work, and it just slowly starts to create this space, and I'm not getting what I need. And whether that's just purely structural or it's got the emotional layering in, which it almost always does, you're dealing with the partner who's often feeling inadequate in some way. And then every so often you get the reverse, right? You've got the birthing person who's gotten into depression, anxiety, whatever it is, and they're like, my partner does this better than me. And that's harder for me. But I obviously work with this all the time. So yeah, you get into this space where it's like you got to just roll with the punches and change your hats, right? You're always changing your hats.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I feel like there's so many hot hats that I wear in general, but it's a very interesting thing. And I have to say, like, it's beautiful to hear you say that, because on a lot of levels, it really is important to have so much training from different things to pull into this, because so much comes up during the postpartum phase. There's just a lot that's coming at you. And it's beautiful, but it's the hardest thing. And you only know what you know. So you need to have the support and able to get through it really well. And if you haven't yet come to the space where you're really, really looking at your relationships and thinking everything, oh, we're fine, it's fine, we're fine, you know, you're probably in for a little bit of a surprise down the road. So it's important work. It's important work worth doing, so that you really have a sustainable relationship that's really supportive and equally cheerleading each other on.
Totally. Kind of odd aside, but when we started talking about birth trauma, I remembered this article that I just read in the New York Times, like in the past week, I want to say. So I really quickly pulled it up because I remembered, you know, I thankfully remembered how to get to it. And I'll tell you what it is in case you haven't read it, and I'll put it in the notes for our listeners. It doesn't sound like it's going to be about birth trauma. I was surprised. It came out of left field. The article is called "The Kidnapping I Can't Escape." And I was like, oh, what? That just sounded interesting. And it was like available as an audio file, and I was in a long Uber ride, and I was like, I put on New York Times audio and started listening to this story. Thought I was going to get like my murder mystery fix. And all of a sudden, it turns into a story about birth trauma. And I'm glad I had to go back and find it, because I thought I would have bookmarked it, and I didn't. I'm bookmarking it now as we speak, because I think this article is something that people need to read. So when you started saying, you know, the way it can come up in a million different ways, of course, I know that. But this article brought it to a whole other level. Like we're talking about like years after a birth, the scent of a certain soap from a hospital was a trigger. And I was like, thank God I don't have that strong of a sense of smell in that way. That sounds just atrocious. So it's a really, really, really interesting story. And to listen to the story is 54 minutes and 53 seconds. I mean, it is a long story, but a very worthy read or listen for anyone who's really trying to deeply understand birth trauma from the perspective of somebody who is a fantastic writer.
Oh, I love it. Well, I do think it's really important that people process their birth, and I don't think enough people understand why. And that's one thing that I always do in my postpartum visits, is to process the birth through with both the mom and the partner. Yep. Because there's so many things that may be, you know, back in parts of their mind that they're pushing back, or they're not really aware of, and it comes up later for them. And if you're not processing your birth in a way that, you know, you're really looking at the things that not only didn't happen well, but happened well. Like it's kind of like motherhood. Like you can get so focused on what's not going well.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, yes.
And just get so stuck in that you forget to say, what is going well? And what am I doing fantastically? And so there's that part of it too, is sometimes you can get stuck in the birth trauma so much that you forget all of the beautiful, wonderful, powerful things that you did and that other people did with you and for you. And, you know, that can help shift things as well. So it's important to process through your birth. And then also just to get to a place where you realize maybe you understood something different. So when you have a doula in particular, or a midwife that's supporting you, it's really important for you to process the birth with them, so that they can maybe clear up a little discrepancy around what you thought something was 100%. Or what happened, you know, so that your perception isn't really skewing or clouding, you know, the truth of the situation.
Yeah, what I tell people on that note is, if there is any at all reoccurring thought that you find yourself shoving back out of your mind because you don't understand why you're thinking it, but it just keeps coming back, just ask me. I'll tell you what that means, because it's these one-off comments that were made nurse to nurse in the room off to the side. What did it mean when she said blah, blah, blah? And it doesn't sound like anything to them, but I know exactly what that means, right? That kind of stuff. So people do come back weeks later and go, hey, Tanya, can I ask a question? I'm like, sure. And sure enough, it's like some little kernel of something that could become something that festers, right? We don't want the festering. That's why we go over your birth stories the way we do.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I have that a lot when there's things that are done without their consent. So one of the main things that happens a lot of time is giving Pitocin after the birth without asking in the IV, if they have an IV, and then realizing that it's happening, and they weren't asked, and the feeling of intrusion that happened there from not having consent. And it seems like it's a small thing.
Yeah.
But actually that's quite big when you don't give consent, and it's going into somebody's body and then eventually into the baby, and then just what happens from that one thing. So there's a lot to process.
I will also link in the show notes that article, as I said, but also I'm sure I've mentioned her on the show before, but it's been a long time, the feminist midwife. If anyone doesn't know who the feminist midwife is, she is doing all this amazing work around consent. That is what she does. And her work is beautiful and powerful. And so if you guys are looking for resources in that department, she is the place to go. Kristy, I want to be respectful of your time and let you get on with your evening and your kids and get to bed at a decent time. And so I'm going to say we have gone the full arc from pregnancy to postpartum. So will you please tell our listeners how to find you, learn about you, or utilize your services should they wish to do so?
Thank you. This has been so great. And I literally could talk about it forever because
I know, I could too.
It's such a fun thing, but I'm so passionate about it. Yes, they can find me, and most of the time I'm on Instagram, which is at Kristy Mia, which is KRISTYMIA co, or KristyMia.com. And you'll see a lot of the things that we are offering right now. There's a mother's coaching that's starting in October, which is a 3-month series that I'm so excited about. Bringing a lot of women into confidence and really just enjoying a life that feels so good and sustainable, and that they're just living the way that they didn't think that they could, because a lot of times we get so overwhelmed in motherhood that we tend to lose ourselves. So that's what that tends to focus on, as well as the childbirth education series that is starting in September in downtown Napa in California, and one that's starting online as well. But those are mostly where I'm at. You can find me on YouTube. You can find me on TikTok. It's the whole gamut of it, but just look for Kristy Mia. It looks like Mia, but it's actually Maya. People can DM me. I give free calls to help people through the process of just discovering what it is that they're needing for support. And I'm happy to do that because I think everybody deserves support, and we're not meant to do it alone.
Thank you so much for your work and for your time. I so appreciate you.
Thank you. I appreciate you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Mother Wit podcast. If any of the issues we discussed today resonate with you or your experience, I'd love to hear from you. Leave me a voicemail at 917-310-0573, or better yet, email me a voice memo at tanya@motherwitmaternity.com. I really want to hear what worked for you, what didn't work, what support you'd wished you had, how you got through the tough times, how you advocated for yourself, or especially any tips you want to share with our listeners. I want to hear all of it. And if you'd really like to work together, you can get a discount on your first consultation with me at motherwitmaternity.com using the code FIRSTCONSULT 10% off. That's 10% symbol, all one word. Okay, that's all. It's wonderful being in community with you all. Thanks again for listening, and see you next time.
And remember, listeners, nothing we discuss on this show should ever be considered medical advice. Please speak to your local provider about anything that comes up in this show that resonates with you and your needs and your health care.